Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about conservation photography and how photographs can help us learn about what is going on in our environment. My guest is J. Henry Fair. He is an artist, a scientist, a correlation engineer, a photographer, and co-founder of the Wolf Conservation Center in New York. He is also included in the book Human Nature, Planet Earth in Our Time. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here.
I thoroughly enjoyed this beautiful book of photography with over 12 photographers sharing their work, but their stories were equally interesting about why they photographed what they did, whether or not it was underwater, it was big agribusiness, it was remote Arctic, and even yours, which includes aerial photos of industrial scars and toxic sites, which we'll talk about in a moment. But tell us how this book is being used to help people realize they need to take action, because the photographs are all beautiful and so varied from around the world.
The book is, as you say, it's really a treasure. The 12 photographers, each of whom have a different approach to telling a story about nature in peril. The pictures are such a treasure. Some of them are so gruesome. Mine are beautiful and gruesome, but the very pleasure of going through the book, I think, leads viewers to start to consider these issues that threaten us so terminally.
You mentioned your pictures, and I'm looking at some of them now. Gorgeous colors, gorgeous forms. It looks like artwork, like paintings, and yet what's gruesome about it is I'm reading the descriptions and I'm looking at coal ash waste. I'm looking at disposal trucks pouring waste into slags from a steel mill, looking at the aerators that agitate waste from the manufacture of facial tissues. The list goes on and on. Every single kind of toxic site from our industrial operations. How did you pick which ones you photographed, and how did you get up there in the air to do it?
Well, first let me start by adding one more job title, which may be the most important, and that is storyteller, because I believe stories are the most essential human art form, and possibly the first. And it's how we transmit wisdom and knowledge and understanding. And so I view myself as that, with the aid of pictures, video, whatever. And so what I'm doing is telling stories about the impact that we each have with our daily decisions. Yeah? If you blow your nose into a facial tissue, I don't use brand names, if you blow your nose into a facial tissue, you're causing tremendous water pollution, tremendous climate change, and a tremendous disposal problem, all with one blow of the nose.
People don't realize they don't need those facial tissues to be white. They can be made out of recycled material.
Or why not a handkerchief?
Exactly, reuse.
Yeah.
But you travel to different parts of the world. You show the tar sands refineries in Alberta, Canada. You show the Rio Tinto mine in Spain and how the river is red because of the toxics from the mine.
Yeah, in fact, it's one of the gravest environmental disasters in Europe, both the mine and the fertilizer factory right next to it. It started, of course, because I'm a photographer and I love to make graphic images which intrigue people. Each story evolved in a different way, whether it was an environmental group that asked me to go photograph the cutting down of an old-growth forest for facial tissues, or whether it's me realizing that Congress was considering coal ash legislation and I needed to be part of the drumbeat, trying to explain to the public these complex issues of why coal ash is such a problem for your own health and why it's there, how it got there, and what we can do about it. The genesis of each story started in a different place, and some of them just happened because I was fascinated with an area and its history, like the Mississippi River, and flying over the river and making these pictures.
Seeing these places, the fracking and the damage caused from waste of mining is powerful and certainly is something that we don't see in our everyday life. And some of the other photographers presented pictures that we don't see in our everyday life. In fact, one of them got arrested for taking a picture of a factory farm, and you wonder why.
This photographer, it's a good story, he's in the book, George Steinmetz, was photographing factory farms in Indiana, and Indiana has passed a gag law at the behest of the factory farming industry because precisely they don't want the public to know the damage being caused by factory farming. So they made a law against photographing it, which of course is a direct violation of our freedom of speech. And he was doing aerial photographs of this tremendous environmental disaster and was arrested when he came down on the ground.
When you see the picture of the turkeys crammed into one building, you wonder, how can people eat these animals?
Yeah, a dear friend of mine the other day was telling me that he shops for the cheapest food. And I said, Michael, you're doing yourself and the planet so much damage by buying the cheapest thing. That's the thing with the most chemicals, the most pesticides, the most hormones, because that's the way they raise it so cheaply in a factory farm.
Two other photographers took a picture that has really become classic about the climate change, the glaciers melting, the icebergs melting, when they took a picture of a starving bear because the ice wasn't there for the bear to be on to go out and hunt, and it was starving. And yet they got a lot of negative comments. But this is what's happening, and they showed it.
It's a beautiful picture. And one wonders how much of the negative commentary is generated by paid publicity. I'm very cynical. I've seen industry spend money to change the public opinion. Well, we all know that the oil companies have spent millions and millions spreading disinformation about the climate crisis, and they're causing it. I wonder how much of the negative publicity about a picture of a hungry bear came from real people, or how much of it maybe came from paid content generators. I don't know.
Another picture that I think was truly the saddest of all was when a photographer was called to fly to Africa to take a picture of the last northern white rhino male just before it died. In other words, he took a picture of a species that became extinct.
Became extinct in front of his eyes.
That is shocking.
Yeah, that's a heart-rending moment and a heart-rending photograph. The book is a wonderful treasure, as I say, because it is 12 different photographers with 12 completely different views on the crisis facing us. It is a crisis. We're talking about, will our civilization survive?
There were some photographers who loved getting underwater with the wildlife, and their stunning photographs of animals just being themselves. Yeah. Sometimes very, very cute pictures of a seal or a whale, and other times a very sad one of a sea turtle caught in a net.
Yeah.
It's such a variety of beautiful nature, and yet also what humans are doing to nature and doing to the other animals on the planet.
Yes, it's hard for people to comprehend the fact that there will be no more polar bears. Extinction is such a difficult concept to grasp, but can we imagine a world with no tigers? no polar bears? It's coming, and it's coming quickly, and only a drastic change in human behavior will change that outcome. Let me add one more thing to that, and that is, I believe that we can make this drastic change in our behavior, be the better for it. We're not talking about a world where we all live in want and suffering. I think more to the point, we're talking about a world where everyone could live in a sustainable way.
I must say that I was thrilled when I opened the page to Steve Winter's photograph, which was really done by a remote camera. I don't know if he had set it up or what, but it is of a radio-collared cougar that we know here in Los Angeles as P22. It's found in our Griffith Park, the largest sort of wilderness park in the city. We have such a problem in protecting the mountain lion and cougars here in Southern California because they're getting killed crossing the freeway going from one mountain range to the other.
Because we've sliced up their habitat.
Exactly.
Of course, we relentlessly expand and grow our suburbs. You mentioned that I was involved with the Wolf Center, which is a great project, and it's still doing great work. I'm no longer there. When people would ask, why do I care about saving wolves? We were in a rich suburb outside of New York City. We would say, well, in fact, we care about saving wolves because to save big predators means saving big areas of habitat. And only by saving those big areas of habitat, which happen to be the places, the areas that filter our water and produce the clean air for us. So only by saving that habitat area can we save ourselves. So we save the wolf, and on the same plane, we save the mountain lion because it saves ourselves.
So often people have mentioned over my decades of environmental work, why do I care about the animals and plants? What about all the human beings? Well, if we don't have the animals and plants, we don't have the food, the resources, everything we human beings need to survive, the air, the water, all of it. So by protecting these ecosystems protects us.
Right.
In fact, some of the people who are doing the underwater photography were talking about how the oceans are being depleted, the resources are being overfished, and there were some interesting pictures of people trying to catch different fish and drawing them and catching them, and how they're overfishing where they are because the need for food, but yet at the same time they are taking too much of a resource.
Yes, the factory farming, again, is not an answer. Just like it's not an answer on land, the factory farming of fish, there was a nice picture in the book of fish factory farms. I have some great ones that are much more abstract as per my usual style. The factory farming of fish is an environmental disaster and will lead further to a collapse of the system.
There are so many great stories, so many beautiful, gorgeous photographs in this book, Human Nature, Planet Earth in Our Time. We're going to talk more about these photographs and stories when we return in a moment with my guest, J. Henry Fair.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with J. Henry Fair. He's an artist, scientist, photographer who has his works included in the book Human Nature, Planet Earth in Our Time, which is edited by Jeff Blackwell and Ruth Hobday. This book really focuses on the need to use our technology, photography, to tell a story, as well as the words about how these stories came about. I find it interesting that some of the people really focused on one area. You focused on aerial shots of industrial toxic sites. Others focused on the cats, which I loved, the cougars, the tigers. One focused on a particular species of parrot. And in the wild, these are gorgeous birds, and you see them so colorful. Yet all these kinds of animals, their ecosystems are being threatened.
Yes, it's so interesting, and I call myself a correlation engineer because I draw correlations with my pictures. I deal with irony, and I make a beautiful picture out of something terrible, and I draw correlations. And one of the correlations that is such a perfect example for me is the fact that if we eat a fast food hamburger, we're cutting down the Amazon. And of course, the Amazon is the stabilizer for the planet. With the loss of this stabilizer, our weather systems will go crazy. When we eat a fast food hamburger, chances are either A, that cow was grown on recently cut Amazonian forest, or B, soy was grown on that recently cut Amazonian forest and shipped to a distant land to feed the cattle. It's an irony that such a simple act as eating a fast food hamburger has such a dramatic worldwide effect.
In fact, every one of the photographers in their stories talked about the need for us to change our habits, our consumerism. And what's interesting is how one who was trained as an architect incorporates pictures of stuff in a mall that apparently goes for miles in China that people go to order products to be made in the factories. And we're looking at stuffed animals, looking at fake flowers, we're looking at fake toys of all sorts of nature. And it's intriguing that that's incorporated in this book about human nature.
Yes. Well, human nature is such a difficult concept in itself and such a quandary and an irony.
One of the photographers started a project many years ago. I don't think it's completed. And it's a fascinating project of trying to take a picture of the 15,000 species that are captively held in zoos and aquariums, and putting those animals behind a simple white or black background so you can really just see the animal, and recording these animals, hopefully before they become extinct.
Yeah, it's a great series. That's Joel Sartore. You know, each one of these photographers in this book is making amazing pictures which draws attention. You know, there's no specific crisis. There's no photographer in the book that you wouldn't want to see.
I certainly enjoyed seeing all of them. It's interesting to me that the majority of the photographers are men. Let's not forget the women. There are two incorporated, and one told her story of growing up in Mexico and how it wasn't appropriate for her to even consider photography as a career.
Yes. Actually, that's Christina Mittermeier.
The other woman focused a lot on indigenous people and their relationship to the animals.
Yes, Amy Vitale.
And I think that we have to recognize, particularly in places like Africa and in the rainforest, that the indigenous people don't want to kill off all the wildlife. They need to preserve and protect the wildlife to preserve and protect their own culture, and that we have to provide alternatives to poaching and bushmeat and activities that they're forced to economically to kill the wildlife. We provide alternatives. These animals won't be shot, won't be killed for their ivory, for their horns, for their meat.
Or killed. You know, one of the other great correlations that I like to relate to people is the fact that the minerals for our smartphones are dug usually in the Congo. They're dug up by indigent miners who kill elephants and lowland gorillas for bushmeat.
That was the saddest picture, seeing them carry a dead gorilla on some poles.
Yes. It's another great example of how a seemingly innocuous action by a consumer causes a worldwide catastrophe. Buying that new smartphone kills a gorilla. It's direct. It happens. You can't deny it.
This book has gorgeous, beautiful pictures pictures. And then it'll have a picture of some sort of destructive activity of humans. My emotions went back and forth constantly.
Yes, the message is the same. And again, this is what I try to do, is take a picture that embodies both the beauty and the horror. But as the book oscillates between beautiful pictures and horrible pictures.
They're not horrible pictures. They're great pictures. Pictures with
horrible
things.
Great pictures of horror. You're correct. Thank you for making that distinction. But yes, the message is the same, which is we're facing a crisis. We need to act immediately. We can do something about this, but only if we act together and immediately.
And there are people that I know of as nature photographers, like Franz Lanting, but yet he, like these other photographers, have changed their focus in not just showing beautiful nature, but using it for conservation purposes.
I feel that people need to see reality and not only pretty pictures of pretty things. Because the message of a pretty picture of a pretty thing is a reassuring, it's a comforting message. And yes, we all want to be reassured and comforted, but if we don't acknowledge and address the realities, then those reassuring and comforting things will be only a memory.
The photographers like you showing toxic waste dumps.
Beautiful toxic waste.
They're beautiful pictures. But animals that we really shouldn't be killing, like the pangolin.
Yes.
And the rhinos or the elephants for their horns or tusks.
Yes. The elephant, of course, is a story we all know. There have been international steps to deal with it. Insufficient international steps, but international steps nonetheless. The pangolin is such a smaller story that until COVID, it wasn't known at all.
What do you mean?
Apparently, we're not sure anymore, but initially it was suspected that it was the killing and eating of pangolins that was part of the chain of transmission of the COVID bacteria.
A good reason we should let the wildlife be in the wild.
Yes, thank you. That's the rub.
Every time I open this book, I marvel at the photography. Human nature, planet Earth in our time. 12 incredible photographers showing works from around the world. They're really spectacular pictures, gorgeous colors, telling incredible stories. Naturally, when there's a book about nature, we see wildlife. Sometimes we see the pictures of animals that we are familiar with, like whales and seals and tigers and elephants. But sometimes the photographers are able to capture animals that basically are pretty unknown to us, but are out there and have a place. I find those absolutely amazing, whether or not it's the flower hat jelly or whether or not it's the frogs or birds, just so many different animals, every single one. The colorful flamingos, the eyes and feathers of different birds, and then we also have woolly monkeys, and it's amazing. Every time I open it, I enjoy seeing these animals again. I enjoy seeing their habitat, their ecosystem, and of course the fish that we rarely see because most of us don't go diving underwater. Is it possible to share all these animals and convince people that they need to be saved?
We have to hope so, and we have to try. Is it possible to save? I hate the expression to save the world, but is it possible? The answer is yes, we could do it. We must act together, and we must act decisively, and we must be diligent. And pray for a miracle, because it will require new miraculous technologies to avert a crisis. There will be a crisis, but one doesn't want to use language that's so terminal, but it's true. Can we avert the end of civilization as we know it? Many people know the story of Easter Island, in which for totemic reasons people cut down the trees, and with the loss of the tree cover, the island ecosystem crashed. I always think about the last man that cut down the last tree on Easter Island. Did he think about the consequences of cutting down the last tree that ruined his whole world? And I'm going to bet the answer is no. he thought, ha, I got it.
I think of the tree being planted as some of the photographers mentioned, that you plant even if you're not going to see the fruit in your lifetime, even if you're not going to see that tree grow to old age in your lifetime. You've planted it for other generations, and that is so important.
Yes. One of my great heroes is the woman in Africa who planted 1 million trees.
When I look at some of the individuals who are trying to protect the endangered species and stop the poaching, it's usually men. But there is one female elephant keeper, the first in Kenya, who is working at a sanctuary for baby elephants that need rescuing. It's nice to see that women are starting to get in the field too.
Oh, I think that women have always been prime movers in any field. I can guiltily say it's a male-dominated world, and that change is slow to come and long needed, but it is coming.
Some of the photographers talked about their encounters with the wildlife and how they swam with sharks. They had their head practically in the head of some of the ocean wildlife. They weren't scared. The scariest part is walking around in the city and getting robbed.
Yes. Well, similarly, in raising wolves, I'm often asked if I was afraid of the wolves. And no, I know wolves well. They are family animals that are fearful and cautious and not at all violent. The fears that we have of wild animals are our own fears of each other transplanted. And again, back to California, the mountain lions that have attacked people only do so because we are encroaching on their habitat. I often wonder, what would an individual human do when someone encroaches on their territory? When someone comes into your backyard, it's a threat to you. So similarly, when we go into a mountain lion's backyard or a wolf's backyard, it's a threat to them.
I wondered how these photographers chose their subject matter, how they gained access. How did you pick all these different places? I read where the majority of them were National Geographic or Geo magazine photographers. Many got assignments to tell stories, then sometimes they had their own idea, but everybody was accomplished in their own right, making those decisions what to take a picture of. How many more toxic waste sites are there that you haven't taken a picture of?
First, I would say that to make a great photograph, you have to be passionate about the subject you're photographing, whether that is a wild animal or a waste site. Second, the stories, if you're lucky enough to have a job that takes you there, that's one thing. But another possibility, often the case for me, is that I'm doing it because I just have to know. I have to see it, and I have to know. And I have to tell that story. Usually my pictures begin with research about an issue, what it is, how it affects people, where it's specifically happening. And then I have to figure out, okay, how do I get to where it's happening? And then how do I charter a little airplane so that I can go and look at it from different angles? And usually, by the way, these things are far from the public view. Purposefully so, because industry doesn't want you to see the damage they're doing. So I have to figure out how to get there, whether it's the northern part of Canada or, the outback of the USA or whatever, and then how to get myself over it, and then how to take the picture that tells the story in an intriguing and beautiful way.
Why did the editors choose you and the other photographers?
The book is a beautiful product. The USA publisher is Chronicle Books, and it was imagined and conceived by a publisher from New Zealand called Blackwell and Ruth, who approached me and told me that they had envisioned a book of 12 great photographers, each with their own take on the environmental crisis that faced us.
I'm so pleased that we do know what is happening from these photographs. I want to thank you so very much for sharing your work with us and that of your fellow photographers. thank you for being my guest.
Nancy, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I have been speaking with J. Henry Fair, who is an artist, scientist, photographer, whose work is included in Human Nature, Planet Earth in Our Time. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.